Daniel, it's been killing me. What does PE stand for? I mean, I think of physical education, and I know that's not what PE stands for. So if you
Oh, it
can
means
explain.
professional engineer.
Oh, I never would have guessed that. I would have failed on Final Jeopardy with that one. So, so if you want to get started with your presentation, we are very eager to hear it. If you all have questions, please put them in the chat and I will consolidate them so that we can ask them after his presentation. So go ahead, Dr. Medina.
Very good. Well, good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for taking time in the morning to listen to us on this very important topic. As Sarah said, I'm Dan Medina. I'm the Stormwater Program Manager for the City of Alexandria. More concretely, I manage a program called Flood Action Alexandria, which is aimed at reducing the risk of flooding citywide. I'm going to share my screen here and just confirm that you see it. Are you able to see the first slide?
Yes.
Very good. Well, here we go. This is a picture of our beautiful Alexandria, pitching in a sunny day. Perfect for a stroll, but the story is different when it rains and when we have high tides. So let's see. Make sure that this thing advances correctly. Can you see a second slide?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So this is the outline of my talk today. As the title said, we're talking about flood management in ultra-urban environments. So the first thing we'll do is define what an ultra-urban environment is. Then we'll talk about some causes of flooding, and we'll describe the approach that the City of Alexandria has been taking to address these problems. So what is an ultra-urban environment? An ultra-urban environment is an area where that is more than 85% impervious. And when I say impervious, it means rooftops, roads and streets, parking lots, even compacted soils that are part of the environment in a city, typically. And why is this important, imperviousness? Because it means the water cannot get into the ground. Before there was anything here in the DC area, there were no roads, there were no houses, or very minimal houses. Rainfall would just come down from the sky and infiltrate in the soil, even in clay soils, meaning in soils that we think don't absorb a lot of water, still quite a bit of water went in. And we didn't have any flooding because most of the water went in the ground. By putting these rooftops, roads, parking lots, we're interrupting that process and water has to run off the surface, and that's what causes flooding. Now, in cities also, we have, like in everywhere in nature, we have streams. And in ultra-urban environments, those streams have been buried, meaning somebody thought it was a good idea to put a stream in a pipe and pave over it and put houses and roads on top of it. And that just seemed to be a good idea at the time, but streams are living entities and they don't like to be in pipes. So that causes a lot of problems as well. And then finally, we talk about ultra-urban environments when they have what is called a combined sewer. And a combined sewer, again, was somebody thought it was a great idea to put both the rainwater and sewage in the same pipe because rainwater was considered a waste and not a resource. The problem is that when it rains a lot, all that sewage cannot be handled by the wastewater treatment plant, and it has to be discharged into the Potomac River or similar receiving bodies of water. So that's a problem as well, because when it floods sometimes in these combined sewers, the water that makes it into people's homes or cars or streets is mixed with sewage, as you can imagine. This doesn't happen everywhere, but in older cities like Alexandria, Washington, DC, or Boston, happens quite a bit. So anyway, so that's the definition of what an ultra-urban environment is. And let's talk about the causes of flooding. And I'm not going to steal Katie Torgersen's thunder here because she has amazing photos that you'll see later on. So I'm just going to gloss over these definitions, kind of prep the road for her to give you those photographs. But the main cause of flooding is existing impervious area, meaning houses that exist, roads that exist already. But there's also future imperviouses. You're probably familiar with the phenomenon of that you see in big cities where small house of the usual 1,200 square foot Cape Cod gets replaced by a huge house with 3,000 square feet. That means there's more rooftop. There's probably a bigger driveway. There might be even highways that get there to those locations. That increases future imperviouses. So new development and redevelopment of older areas causes an increase in imperviouses. The next item is inadequate drainage. Sometimes, well, when water falls on the land, meaning on a street or on a rooftop, it has to go somewhere. And typically there is an underground network of pipes called the storm sewer system. And we have to get that water into those pipes. Those pipes end up in a stream, typically, whether it's Rock Creek or whether it's Cameron Run or 4 Mile Run in the area. The water has to go somewhere. And those pipes were designed for a certain amount of water. And that amount of water has increased over time because more impervious was placed down. Then the network of storm sewers becomes inadequate. There's also encroachment in flow paths. Sometimes water runs over areas that we use in municipal management called easements, meaning it's an area where we can do work to take care of drainage issues. Well, sometimes people just see a lawn area and they build something, a fence on it, or a shed. Sometimes they don't know what's going on, but when we come in to do some maintenance, we find these things that obstruct the path of water. Soil compaction is another factor. Every time we build something, we bring heavy equipment, and that's just going to squeeze the ground until it becomes compacted and water cannot get through compacted soil. And in connection with that, lawns. We think that lawns are a good thing because they're vegetation, but the truth is that lawns, being the largest crop in the Chesapeake Bay area, believe it or not, are not great to absorb water. What we need is something more active, something with deeper roots, native species. So replacement of lawns will go a long way to reduce the amount of water that runs off the land and becomes flooding. What happens is on the left, is described on the left. So you see on the little drawing with the trees, this is what would happen typically in a forested situation. You get water coming down from the sky. A lot of it evaporates, 40% in this case. This is just an example. And a lot of it goes into the ground, like 25% or so. And only 10% becomes runoff, meaning only 10% becomes potentially flooding. But when we paved over, we create a city or a suburb, then the numbers reverse and we get 30% evaporation, but we get about 55% of runoff. And that's what becomes flooding. So, okay, so just some basic concepts of what's going on. Another cause of flooding, though, is high tides. This is a photo I took in Old Town Alexandria on October 29th of this past year. And those high tides, as you can see, are reaching way in the distance. You might see the Potomac River, and the water just comes over up King Street here. You see all these businesses that are flooded. You can see a guy there waiting in the water. That's not very clean water, so I wouldn't do that if I were him. But that happens very often, unfortunately. Sea level rise is going to make things worse because, of course, you can imagine the level in the river is given by the sea that is connected to the river. If that rises, this is going to come further up King Street in Alexandria. Now, what's the role of climate change? On the left, you see a diagram that simplifies what's going on. So you know climate change really is a euphemism for global warming. So global warming means more heat from the sun gets trapped in the atmosphere. More heat increases evaporation, warmer air holds on to more moisture, and then that moisture becomes a cloud, and then it drops to rain, which, because there's more water, becomes heavier rainfall than usually or than it was before under a cooler climate. So that's simple. We know that. That's conceptually very clear. The question is what's going to happen in the future. In the graphic on the right, I'm not expecting you to understand everything that's going on there, but it shows on the horizontal axis the years from the 2000 to 2100, and in the vertical axis it shows the annual amount of emissions of carbon dioxide and equivalents. So you can see that some of these lines predict an increase in those concentrations of carbon dioxide, and some project a decrease. The increase is if we don't do anything, we just keep burning fossil fuels. And the one where we all sing Kumbaya and take care of the environment shows a decrease. Everywhere in between is possible. We don't know what's going to happen between now and 2080, 2100. But it's just to show that it's very difficult to project what's going to happen in terms of climate change. If things continue this bad or worse, then we're going to get this cycle on the left more intense, and we're going to get more heavier rainfall, and things are going to become worse. Okay, so this shows you what we saw. In 2018, it was the wettest year on record for Virginia. And we experienced some regional floods, some local flash floods. One of them, for example, on July 23rd, 2020, 60 to 80% of the monthly average fell in 30 minutes. So just imagine the monthly average for July, most of it fell in 30 minutes in one day. That caused by the flooding in the city. September 10, 2020, same thing. We got a storm that had a rate of 3 inches per hour. In over 10 minutes of that storm, 3 inches per hour fell. That's very intense rainfall. All to say that after we experienced these floods between 2018 and 2021, life changed in Alexandria. And my job was created as a program manager for the Flood Action Alexandria program. So what are we doing? We're taking a holistic approach to flooding. And that improves, that shows the steps that I'm showing you here are the components of such an approach. First of all, we have large capacity projects, and I'll describe all of these in detail as we go along. But we're tackling big things like the large capacity project, smaller things like the spot improvement. We're emphasizing operation and maintenance of the existing systems. We're maintaining our streams and channels. We are involving the community both through a system that we call Alex 311, where people can report on things that are related to flooding. And also we have an advisory group in the community. There's also the Waterfront Initiative, which attempts to take care of the tidal flooding that I showed you earlier. We also have a grant program that gives money to people to take care of problems in their property themselves. And this is all made possible by the Stormwater Utility Fee, which is the source of revenue that we use for this program. So I'll talk about a few of these things one by one. First of all, the large capacity projects. These are, there are areas in the city where drainage just became completely outdated. The pipes are too small. They don't go where they're supposed to go. There's bottlenecks in the system. So we need to do some major rehab in the city. We call those large capacity projects. We also have spot improvement projects. Many of them are about inlets. An inlet is what you see on the leftmost photograph. It's where the water goes in. So when it rains, water falls on the street, the water goes into these inlets. These inlets are connected to a pipe, which is called a storm drain system, and that pipe goes to stream. Sometimes these inlets are too small. So even if there's capacity in the pipe, water just can't get into these. It could be collapsed, it could be under design, it could be clogged with leaves and other kinds of debris. But sometimes we have to go in and rebuild these inlets. And this is what we're showing here in the middle photograph. You have work crew pouring concrete to redo some of these inlets. And on the right, you see one of our engineers inspecting the work. We did this just now on January 24th, 2022. So this is a major piece of our approach. The other piece is operation and maintenance of our stormwater system and our sanitary sewer systems. As I mentioned, sometimes these two are combined and they cause flooding to be also mixed with sewage, which is not a good idea, if you can imagine. So what we do is a number of things, and maintenance is very busy doing all kinds of work. For example, we inspect and clean the storm lines every 3 to 5 years. When we know there's going to be storm, we go out there and try to keep an eye on things that might be clogged. Any infrastructure that is damaged, we repair it. We maintain streams and channels, meaning we dredge sediment, remove garbage that has been accumulating in those channels. There's large infrastructure components like the one you see on the right, on the top of what we call a culvert. It's again one of those urban pipes that has a stream going through it that shouldn't really, but that's the way it is. And we have to clean it, otherwise it gets clogged up and it causes flooding. We also use technology called closed circuit television. And we put a little robot that has a camera down into the sewers, and the robot walks into the sewers and shows us a picture of what's going on. Sometimes we see cracks, we see roots going through the pipes, and that tells us the state of the pipe, and we can say, well, we need to replace it or we need to repair it. We also do street sweeping and leaf removal because that clogs all these components of the storm drain system. And we rely on our community to tell us what's going on. So people can use a system called Alex 311, which functions over the phone, over the web, where people can report to us what they see in their neighborhoods. Another component of our program is the stream and channel maintenance. That basically is to keep the conveyance capacity of the streams, which sometimes gets diminished because of sediment and debris and things like that. You get, for example, the image you see here, imagine just as clogged by trees that have been dragged by a flood up against this bridge. So we take care of those problems. A major component, did I say it was major, is our community outreach. We are open to the neighbors to tell us what's going on. They have flooding problems, like we can have a crew go out there and talk to them. These are three of our engineers that are there looking at drawings with neighbors, receiving their commentary. So it's not really, our community outreach is not only to deliver a message or to deliver things to them, it's also to absorb information from our citizens. We have many ways to communicate with the public. We have a Flood Action Alexandria newsletter that features what's going on, keeping people up to date. It gets distributed via email every month. We have video storytelling, and I'll show you one of those at the end of the presentation. And we also have a heavy presence in social media. I make a parenthesis here. This is all digital. And unfortunately, not everybody is connected, especially the elderly, people from disadvantaged communities don't have internet access, or even if they do, they don't know how to use it. So we are looking very carefully at how to reach out to those non-digital communities in our city, because they also suffer these problems. But as the saying goes, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. If we don't hear from people, sometimes their problems don't get addressed. So we need to expand our coverage. The Waterfront Initiative is totally separate, and it's worth having somebody else who's my peer, the manager for this initiative, come and talk to you about it, because it's a great plan that involves not only a seawall, which we call a bulkhead, to protect the city against tidal flooding, but also urban redevelopment of parks, infrastructure, and amenities in this area. It's a very expensive project. We have about $100 million appropriated for it, or available, I should say, for it, but we need 100 more. So if any of you has $100 million laying around, don't know what to do with it, talk to me at the end of the presentation. It's a great project to look into. There's plenty of documentation out there. We also have a great program that we call Flood Mitigation Grant Program. We don't want our citizens to feel like they're victims, and they're depending on what the government or the city does to improve the situation. But there are technologies out there that people can implement to reduce their exposure to floods. One of them, if you see in the top photo there, is a temporary floodgate. If it's going to rain, a resident can come in and put this device, in this case, blocking the entrance to their basement, and that's going to hold back the water and hopefully minimize damage to the belongings in their basement. On the right, you see that these are just standard AC units, but they usually sit on the ground. If you have seen probably yours, well, and they get damaged if the property gets flooded. So the one idea is to raise them up above ground a few feet and avoid damage to these units. For that, we can offer residents about up to $5,000 of matching funds for them to implement these programs in their property. It took us to work very hard with Richmond, our legislature, to allow us to spend public money on private property, but we achieved that for this case. And then finally, we can do all this, and I can get hired by the city because we have what is called a stormwater utility fee. So stormwater utility fee is a fee kind of like the same that you pay for your water service, your power, or any other utility that comes to your house. We are managing some water that falls on the streets that people use to go from work home and back to work. We're implementing all these programs that I showed, which improve the well-being of the community. So it is worth for the community to have a dedicated revenue stream to pay for this. So what you see here is in the year, the blue bar is what we were spending in fiscal year 2021 to 2030. And then when we got all those floods, it'll switch to the orange line. We went from 19 million to 170 million of investments that we have programmed. And it will continue for fiscal years 23 to 32. It's going to go up to 156. So anyway, we have money to spend in these programs, thanks to Stormwater Utility Fee, which allows us to use this money exclusively for stormwater and flood control projects. And it doesn't, in other words, doesn't have to compete with fire and police and education and things like that. It's a dedicated revenue stream, which makes our life a lot easier. I hope you can all see this video. I'm going to attempt to show. I know there's a delay, but it's only a minute long. So it just gives you a flavor of what we're doing on the ground.
The flooding caused by storms is one of the most common natural disasters in the United States. So the city of Alexandria is rising up and working hard to protect the future.
Very good. I hope you were able to see it. And let's see. And
Great.
that is my last slide. Thank you very
Wonderful.
much. Appreciate it.
Thanks. There are some questions.
Sorry. Try to get out of here.
Thank you. One of the best comment was that about stormwater drains, and that it's sort of everyone's responsibility to look at your stormwater drains, and they get clogged with leaves and they cause flooding in a lot of areas. And I think the one comment was that it's relevant to everyone. And I think perhaps that we all can look at our stormwater drains and not watch the cats go down them, but if they're clogged, to report them. So the first question was, understanding that turf grass lawns don't absorb a lot of water, is grass marginally better than artificial turf? She's wondering, or the person is wondering, if the replacement of grass playing fields with artificial turf has contributed to flood risk.
I don't think so. It's
Okay.
But there's other things to worry about. Artificial turf, just the way it's built. But at this point, it's a hard choice, right? You either maintaining these lawns or you're putting down these artificial surfaces that have this pelletized rubber on them. I mean, I coached my daughter's team for a long time playing soccer, and I mean, in a hot summer day, it just smells like an asphalt factory, right? There's all these pellets of rubber getting heated by the sun. And I would just pick up all those pellets all over the place from my car. So I don't know the answer to that really. It's one of those tough choices. If you have a lawn, you have to water it, you have to replace it, you have to mow it, you have to put fertilizers and pesticides often, so that it's worth using as a field. But it's the other alternative, Scott, is drawbacks as well.
Okay, and kind of along with that, do you have any grants or incentives to replace turf with conservation landscapes? Do you consider turf impervious or pervious for calculating stormwater fees?
Well, that's my dream, to have a program in the city, a lawn replacement program in the city. And that is actually not as complicated as it sounds. It's about changing people's mindset, right? Everybody loves their lawn. I don't know why, but it just seems like there's such an industry behind lawns, even though you have to mow them every time, you have to fertilize them, you have to do all things to keep them looking like this picture perfect golf course. Native species have less maintenance, they have more environmental benefits. So the idea is to rip out lawns and replace them with native species, maybe even a food garden, right? But sometimes those are not allowed by municipal ordinance to have a food garden or an orchard in somebody's front yard. You can in your backyard, but not in the front yard. But I think it would be great if you were using your front lawn to grow food, wouldn't it?
Right.
And at the same time, improve all the conditions for runoff, and reduce pesticide use, and machines spewing smoke in the middle of the day. You could create even jobs by taking care of these gardens anyway. So there are many advantages of doing that.
Okay. And this is posted by someone who lives in DC. And there was also a response, but you may not know, but does DC have anything as progressive as what Alexandria is doing? Do various jurisdictions talk with each other about what each is doing, or are you little isolated islands?
No, we actually are sharing quite a bit of information through the Metropolitan Council of Governments. And so we're in touch with our neighbors in the area, with Fairfax County, with Arlington County, with the district counties in Maryland and Virginia, because we have the same problem. Right now, we share information. Our rain gauges are open to the public. Anybody can see the data that we report, and vice versa. We're trying to connect them even more so they're interoperable, as the term goes. Everybody can benefit from information. We are planning flood preparedness week event with our neighbors, Arlington County and Fairfax County. So yeah, so we collaborate in a number of ways regionally, and that's the way it needs to be. Water doesn't care about political boundaries. It just runs off, and if there's too much, it causes flooding wherever it goes.
Okay, and then probably the last question, because there's a lot of questions back and forth in the chat. What happens to the debris soil that is dredged? Where do you place it? What do you do with it?
Good question. It depends on what it tastes like. And sometimes it's branches and trees, so can get chipped. Sometimes if it's sediment, we can put it in, we could use it for landfill covers, or we can use it for other beneficial uses. Perhaps it's suitable with quality materials for construction. But it's a major expense. When we dredge these things, we have to figure out what to do with them. And it's not that it ends. I mean, once we dredge it, more sediment keeps coming down, so this has to be done periodically. Yeah, so it's a difficult point. Yeah.
And a related question, and this is the last one. When you encourage more water off the streets in Alexandria, where does it go? What happens downstream?
Again, very good question. So the system is designed so that water goes into those storm inlets that I showed you and into a pipe, and that pipe goes into stream. Now, the point where a pipe goes into stream is called an outfall. And you can have a fire hose of water coming out of those outfalls and hitting the stream, with the receiving stream. That causes a lot of erosion problems. You can imagine you have this jet of water shooting into stream bank. It's going to erode the stream bank. It's going to take down trees. And that's why most of the streams in urban environments are suffering from what's called an urban stream syndrome. Too much water arriving at these very concentrated points and blasting through the streams. It shouldn't be like that, but that's the way the system is designed. For new development, we have something called best management practices for stormwater management. And before that water hits the stream, we can put it in, say, in a pond, an artificial lake, and that reduces the velocity of the water. But in older cities like Alexandria, those things are very rare, and the stream just receives that full brunt of the pipe hitting the stream bank.
Okay, thank you very much. That was really, really very interesting. And I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to do this, as I'm sure everybody else did, because there were a lot of questions. So next up.
Yeah, my pleasure. And I'll just hang around if there's more questions.
Okay, great. That would be wonderful. Thank you. Next up is Frank Dawson, who has a super long title, Division Chief for the Watershed Restoration Division for Montgomery County Department of Environmental Protection. And Frank, I'm sure you're ready to go.
I am. Good morning, everyone. That was a very interesting discussion. And folks should feel free to maybe ask me some of the same questions that were asked earlier. So in my job, we're involved in designing, constructing, maintaining, and inspecting stormwater management facilities in Montgomery County. We also have a number of private property programs, rainscapes, where we provide rebates for folks to convert lawns to conservation landscapes. We have a tree replanting program. We have a pet waste reduction, litter reduction, salt reduction programs, and we have an organic lawns program. We also monitor the streams in Montgomery County. So let me jump to share the screen and tell me if go. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Great. All right. Thank you. So I'm going to talk
Frank,
to you.
Frank,
Yep.
do you want to minimize your slides over on the left-hand side?
Yeah.
You know how, if you can't, that's fine.
Yeah, I'm not.
Okay, go ahead.
So,
Move on.
So I'm going to, let's see if this is going to work. Okay. So I'm going to talk to you about a little bit about just setting the stage for trying to figure out how to integrate flood management and stormwater management. There's an awful lot going on right now. And then I'm going to talk to you about some of the things we're doing in Montgomery County. And I'll be more than happy to answer any questions. So as discussed in the previous presentation, the climate is changing. This slide shows the intensity of a storm that transpired in Montgomery County last September. And we know that these storms are happening more frequently. They're more severe. And these events end up being more like natural disasters, like hurricanes, tornadoes, and that most of the modeling suggests that this is going to continue into the future, and that we're seeing flooding in areas that is not in traditional areas where we see flooding. There we go. So again, as was described earlier, Flooding and drainage issues arise from runoff from impervious surfaces, roads, rooftops, driveways. That water can come from county property, including our roads, state and municipal property, including their roads, and private property. So there's ultimately a shared responsibility in addressing these problems. And as in Alexandria, we have a storm drain infrastructure that's maintained by the state, by the county, by municipalities, and by private property owners. Now, stormwater management requirements have historically focused on water quality, not water quantity. They're designed to remove pollutants from the first flush of rainfall. And we know that even with good stormwater management, that during significant rainfall events, we're going to have water flowing off these properties. So these requirements do not address flooding events or lot-to-lot drainage. So in light of some of the recent flooding events at both the state and local government levels, there's been quite an intense look at the policies and programs that address flooding and stormwater. So in November, the Maryland Department of Environment released this report, which we call the A-Storm report. And in this report, the Department of Environment is talking about and is working on looking at updating stormwater quantity management for flood control. They're going to be investigating methods to implement additional stormwater quantity management. That will include proposing new regulatory standards for conveying 100-year storm events. And it calls on the state and local governments to identify frequently flooded areas after 2000. And as part of this report, they're going to be calling on local governments like Montgomery County to develop comprehensive watershed studies and flood control plans. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later. And ultimately, this will result in new regulations for stormwater management. At the county level, the Office of Legislative Oversight conducted an assessment, and they had 5 recommendations. One was to conduct a facility and asset risk assessment and to develop a county-wide resiliency strategy and implementation projects to compile and centralize all the climate-related data, to have an assigned single point of contact in the county for flood issues. Right now, this is a shared responsibility between Department of Environmental Protection, Transportation, Permitting Services, and Emergency Management. So sometimes it's not that easy for residents to navigate. And that calls for us to increase coordination across departments. In the county, we've created a task force that is trying to improve that coordination. And importantly, to improve our communication and outreach to community. And then kind of the last piece of the picture for right now is we just got a new MS4 permit in Montgomery County, and it does continue to focus on water quality. It requires us to reduce pollutants in stormwater discharges. It calls on us to implement stormwater management in areas that historically did not have stormwater management. calls for up to 2,000 acres of that type of treatment. But for the first time, there's an emphasis on flood-related issues concerning both the inspection and maintenance of our storm drain conveyance system in the county. So that is a significant change in this permit. And so in order to integrate these two pieces, it's really important to understand some of the challenges. First, there's a misconception that stormwater management is flood management. Stormwater management has the ability to delay the movement of water and watersheds from small rain events, but not these larger storms that we're seeing. There's going to be a need to change stormwater management standards. It'll be interesting to see how that's received by the development community. We still need a better understanding of where flooding is occurring, will occur, and why. And as was discussed in the first presentation, in these highly urbanized areas, there's limited opportunities for new stormwater and flood control practices. We also have historical development patterns where we've built homes in the ways of floods before we were concentrating our development out of these areas. Our financing mechanism, our water quality protection charge in Montgomery County was primarily created to address water quality and not quantity. And right now, only a small percentage of those funds are used on flood-related work. We also need to be able to address equity going forward. We can't just be addressing flooding in areas that have the loudest voices or those that are the most politically organized. We need to make sure that's equitable, and we have to figure out ways to navigate some of the new federal funding that's available. So what are we doing in Montgomery County, where there's a lot going on right now, particularly in light of the major storms that hit the county last fall? We're in the process of developing a comprehensive flood management strategy and plan in the county. We're expanding our flood preparation education for our residents. A lot of that's through social media. We're increasing the number of flood sensors on our dams and frequently flooded roads in partnership with the federal Homeland Security. This is going to help us understand better where our flooding is transpiring and at what frequency. We're remapping our 100-year floodplain, and we expect that floodplain to expand and end up including more homes in the county. We're doing our first flood resiliency study in partnership with the Department of Defense at the Bethesda Naval Base. And we're reevaluating the use of development waiver requirements for stormwater management. As is the circumstance in Alexandria and other jurisdictions in Maryland, we do a lot of work in maintaining our storm drain infrastructure, as was discussed earlier, clearing of debris, addressing water ponding on roads, repairing, replacing curbs, storm drain structures, and culverts and pipes. A lot of the culverts that water moves through have been constructed of corrugated metal, and they're beginning to fail and need to be repaired. And lastly, we have a number of programs that can help property owners address some of their drainage concerns, such as rainscapes. That's a rebate program where you can build rain gardens and rainscapes, and the county cost shares that. And we also have a tree planting program, but just as a kind of a final reminder, these programs will not control stormwater from these major storm events. So there's a lot of ongoing work and coordination in Montgomery County right now to try to bring flood management and water quality management together. I know I covered a lot in a short period, and I'd be more than glad to answer any questions.
Okay.
So I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay. There were a lot of questions and a lot of comments. The first one was, we're all part of the Chesapeake Bay area. And what do we need to do to help force our elected officials, our legislature, regarding flooding in the Chesapeake Bay area?
Wow. Well, that's a big question. I think the thing that we need to be doing is we need to be educating our elected leaders about the increased frequency of these flooding events and trying to figure out how do we manage these floodwaters for water quality issues, and not just be implementing solutions that just move the water as rapidly as possible off the land. The more we do of that, the more those pollutants will be reaching the bay. And so that's a very challenging issue. But folks, our elected officials, residents need to understand that there are consequences of all of our actions, and we need to figure out and to take all those things into consideration.
Okay. I think I heard you say that Montgomery County is figuring out issues to do with the 100-year floodplain. And one of the questions was, how is Montgomery County supporting homeowners who live in the 100-year floodplain? And there was also a question from someone in DC who would also like to know how DC is supporting homeowners who live in the 100-year floodplain as well.
Well, the one is the recognition that they're in the 100-year floodplain. There is a floodplain insurance that is available to all residents in the county. I'm not an expert on floodplain insurance, but that is certainly available out there. And, you know, we're continuing to try to figure out ways over time as we study individual watersheds in more detail, how to try to minimize some of the flooding that transpires to individual homeowners.
Okay. There was a comment that the main contact for Seneca Creek WP for the county flood issues has 311 reports. Do you want to make any comment about that? I think it's somebody who really knows about Seneca Creek.
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm not sure exactly what that means.
Okay. Is there anything like LEED certification, and that's for buildings, for neighborhoods or HOAs?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay. Okay. And I think here's one.
Can I speak?
Let's see.
May I answer that question?
For one,
Please.
Hi, can I answer that question? There's
okay,
a program called SITES, SITES, developed by the American Society of Landscape Architects and other organizations, which is a rating system comparable to LEEDs. Okay, so there is a rating system for the development of landscape, a criteria and a point system and an awarding system, just like there is for LEED.
okay. And here's another comment. For one, support retaining the RGGI, which funds the Community Flood Preparedness Fund, as that is in danger of being abolished in the current legislative session. And I don't know if that's Virginia or Maryland. I'm just reading the comment. Vern, do you know anything about that, RGGI? You've been giving really good comments in the chat.
This is Medina. It's the Regional Greenhouse Initiative.
Oh, okay.
And it's a source of actually selling carbon credits in the open market, which has gotten quite a bit of money to Virginia. But newly elected Governor Youngkin is threatening to get out of that deal for unspecified reasons, but it usually is just to go against the grain. But that's what it is. The state of Virginia collects money to do a coastal flooding resilience plan using those funds through something called the Community Flood Preparedness Fund. And it's been given money to communities to take care of flooding problems. If that initiative goes away, that money goes away too.
Great. There's a lot of really good information on the chat. For those of you who are just listening, you might want to take a moment and look at the chat. There's websites on the chat from everybody else. So that's actually, it's a really important place right now to look for information. We're doing a lot of really good sharing. It's wonderful. Thank you, Frank. That was really informative. And it's great to see how Montgomery County is really stepping up and looking at a lot of different ways to answer this question.
Yeah, it's a very complicated issue that merits implementing a diversity of solutions. So we're looking forward to working on figuring this out. So thanks.
It's very dynamic.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, Katie, you're on a little bit. Yeah, thank you again. Katie? Katie Torgersen, let me get my little page up to tell you about Katie. Katie is a planner for Fairfax County, Virginia, and I'm sure there's more to what you do than just planning. And so I'm delighted to introduce Katie Torgersen, and she can tell us a little bit more about what she does rather than just plan.
Well, good morning. My name is Katie Torgersen. I'm a planner and an engineer with the Fairfax County Department of Public Works and Environmental Services Stormwater Planning Division. And so I've got a variety of roles. I've been in the stormwater management area for over a decade now, but my main focus right now is flood risk reduction and working with county departments to initiate kind of a comprehensive plan for the county. And that is what I'm going to share a little bit about today. I'm going to build on Alexandria and Montgomery County's presentations and delve into the causes of flooding. I think we are more at an initial stage than some of our neighbors, and we are all learning from each other, which has been a really great experience. So I'm going to start with, I'm going to try to answer the question, why does flooding occur in Fairfax County? But it's really relevant for our region. We all share similar reasons for the issues of flooding. All right, can you all see that?
Yes.
Great. Okay, as I mentioned, the county is in very initial stages of a comprehensive flood risk reduction plan and resiliency efforts. So in order to start developing this plan, we really had to better understand the root causes of flooding. And I wanted to start with just some photos of flooding in the county. Flooding occurs during forecasted weather events like hurricanes and tropical storms. For example, during Tropical Storm Lee in 2011, Fort Belvoir recorded over 7 inches of rain in 3 hours, and that tropical storm caused over $10 million in damages to the county's bridges and roads alone. And then most recently, we had the remnants of Tropical Storm Ida come through and affect isolated parts of the county. So I ask you to remember this photo of the flooded townhome community to the right. It shows up again under different circumstances. So flooding can also happen during these pop-up thunderstorm events. That's the same community in the photo that you see there. And this occurred during one of those summer thunderstorms. And these high intensity, short duration, localized storms can have significant impacts as well. So to put this into perspective, during the July 8th, 2019 storm, between 3.5 and 5 inches of rain fell in an hour in certain parts of the county, and that caused over $14.8 million in damages. So these unpredictable thunderstorms can cause as much damage as a tropical storm. And you may be thinking wild weather and lots of rain. It really sounds like climate change must be to blame. But diving into the issues, we found flooding is a lot more complicated than that. So I'm going to walk through some of the reasons that flooding occurs in the county. And we'll look at the impact of land use changes, including impervious cover and changes to the floodplains and overland flow patterns that were mentioned in the previous presentations, as well as some development trends we're seeing with residential infill and then redevelopment into more urban and denser mixed use communities. And then finally, climate change. And I had wanted to learn a little bit more about the League of Women Voters and looked at your legislative priorities and positions that you take on key issues. And I noted that the position on land use policies and plannings for supporting environmental protection and resource conservation. So I hope this information from this presentation can kind of help inform your understanding of the role that land use does play in flooding. So to start to better understand flooding, we have to look at this land use change. The county experienced rapid urbanization after World War II. And so farmlands and forests became parking lots, buildings, and streets. And before the 1970s, there was little to no stormwater management requirements. There were few pipes to collect stormwater and carry it to the streams. And there were no facilities to hold the stormwater and slow the flow of the water to prevent the flooding. So as a result, we had a lot more stormwater runoff moving very quickly downstream. Additionally, stormwater was considered a common nuisance and we wanted to get it away as fast as possible. So we ended burying and piping streams. We built in the floodplains. We filled the floodplains in, and then we removed the natural buffers, the riparian areas adjacent to the stream banks. And we didn't just remove ecological habitat in doing so. We removed the area for the water to slow down and spread out, and the area that served for temporary storage and detention to prevent that downstream flooding. So in the images, you can see a portion of Tripp's Run stream, which runs in a part of the county. It was channelized back in, I think, the 1950s. The stream buffer was removed, the trees were removed, and houses were built in the floodplain. So additionally, some of the older homes can sit in these bowls or sumps. And so during large storm events, the pipes become overwhelmed, and all of that water, additional water, basically has to flow over land to get to a downstream point. And so these homes that sit in these sump areas, the water pools and has no way to get out of the bowl without flooding the home. Sometimes we refer to it as an overland relief issue. And you can see those sump areas. They're the red dot hatched areas in the photo. And so additionally, sometimes older roads can also act as almost dams. They're the culverts that pass the water under the roads are undersized, and water can back up against the road and kind of cause a backwater effect, sometimes backing that water into homes. So that kind of looked at our past development trends and how those impacted land use and the conveyance of water. And now take a look at some of the more recent trends that we're seeing. Many of the older neighborhoods that we kind of highlighted that developed before the 1970s and lacked stormwater management are now undergoing redevelopment through residential infill. Sometimes people call this mansionization, but it's the small homes are replaced with much larger homes that come with patios and driveways and pools. And in doing so, these lots that were originally sized with 30% impervious coverage of small house with the driveway now have over 50% cover. And that generates a lot more stormwater runoff. Additionally, we see these, in many older neighborhoods, stormwater flows over land for long stretches, going in between the houses and down the roads before it reaches a pipe system. And as these neighborhoods redevelop and the smaller homes are replaced with much larger homes, the space between the homes shrinks and it becomes a lot narrower. So in the photos, you can see this block. We have the 1990 photo, and then 30 years after in 2021. And the block's almost completely redeveloped through individual lot residential infill. And so you see the smaller footprints of the homes in the 1990 image. There's lots of room and trees around the houses, lots of places for the water to flow through and infiltrate into the ground before it reaches a stream, which is just beyond the photo. And then in 2021, you can see that a lot of that space has been taken up by much larger homes. The trees have been removed, and there's not a lot of area for that water to flow in between the homes. And that can also lead to flooding issues. Additionally, these overland flow paths are not really highlighted on people's plats. Sometimes they're not obvious on design plans, and they may not be known to the residents. So people really like to use their yards, and over time, residents block flow paths with fences or walls, play structures, planting beds, you name it. And so in the photo on the slide, you can see kind of the combined effect of those smaller homes becoming much larger homes and shrinking that flow path, and then the addition of fences and sheds coming in and blocking the flow path, which is represented by the blue arrow. And then, all development can lead to tree removal, and soil is rolled over and compacted during construction. So the soil that was once able to infiltrate stormwater and absorb it into the ground can now sometimes produce as much runoff as pavement. So, all of these may not seem so bad site by site, but the cumulative stormwater impacts can be very detrimental. So in the neighborhood on the screen, you can see almost 50% of the homes have redeveloped since 1990, and with little to no stormwater management on the site or within the neighborhood itself. So it's adding to an already existing drainage issue because the neighborhood was developed prior to the stormwater management. And just to highlight the human element to that, what does that mean to the people that live downstream and experience this flooding? The home with the red circle has had permanent sandbags at their basement door due to repeated flooding. Additionally, we're seeing, similar to the other areas in the region, we're moving to a built-out condition. So we're shifting from new development on green space to redevelopment where old parking lots and buildings are converted into these high-density mixed-use areas. And you may think, won't stormwater conditions improve with the redevelopment? And ideally, we want these sites to substantially improve stormwater management, not just not make it worse, but we want to fix those past mistakes and add the stormwater management that was missing when the sites first developed in the 1960s. But that's not how our regulations are set up. Oops, go back there. Our regulations are primarily based on land cover change. So it's a conversion of the green space to buildings. And with redevelopment, there's little land cover change, right? You're moving from an impervious condition of a parking lot to an impervious condition of a building, and oftentimes adding some green space back in. So there's very little stormwater management requirements in those circumstances. And we know that if we don't build in these stormwater management facilities that we're missing and bring these sites up to modern standards now, we'll have to wait another 50 years until we get that chance again. And so, kind of may have seen these similar pictures in the past presentations. I think it's important to note that we haven't really talked about climate change yet. So the flooding that we see hasn't resulted in the changes from rainfall events. The same 3 inches of rain that fell over 3 hours in 1950, the same amount of rain, that falls now. But what's changed is the land use conditions. So the increased impervious cover, the loss of trees, the change in slope, the soil compaction, all of this generates more stormwater that, if not properly managed, causes flooding downstream. And this is where climate change comes in. So climate change is going to make these existing issues worse. It's predicted that there would be an increase in these more intense storm events. Dr. Medina highlighted some of these. We'll see more storms like the July 8th, 2019 storm that dropped 3.5 to 5 inches of water, in an hour. And we've seen a couple of these storms since then. So climate change isn't necessarily causing the problem, but it's going to make the existing problems a lot worse. And we're starting to plan for this new reality with an increased focus on resiliency and learning a lot from our neighbors along the way. So I want to leave you just with like 2 key takeaways, because I know that's a lot of information, but basically, land use practices, particularly the addition of impervious surface, significantly contributes to flooding. And then climate change is going to make these existing conditions worse. So, I hope, kind of armed with this increased understanding of why flooding occurs, we, the county and the community, can use information to help inform our programs, our policies and regulations to help address flooding. And that's it. I can answer any questions.
Well, there continues to be an awful lot of back and forth about artificial turf, and I'll let those people continue to go back and forth. But Diane Habino reminds us that the League of Women Voters U.S. position on water support measures to reduce pollution in order to protect surface water, groundwater, and drinking water. Oh, my chat went away. Okay. and drinking water, and set up a process to evaluate interbasin water transfers, and says we can advocate with this position, so that now that we're for you league members, we're in program planning mode coming up. So this is something that you can add to your program planning and become advocates for this. This is perfect timing to think about what it, somebody else wrote that she's been dealing with flooding in her basement for however many years in DC. So this is something that you can add to your program planning and advocate for in the upcoming year. LVUS supports it. You can support it in your own individual leagues. This is perfect timing to do this.
If I may, this is Dan Medina.
Yeah.
I think this is, what you just said is perfect, but if, I think I speak for my colleagues here, reading this statement, it's too narrow. We're talking about water quality, interbasin transfers, those are very specific things, but we need a holistic approach to water that looks at water quantity, water quality, the populations affected, issues of equity in those situations, financing. I think there's an opportunity for the league to really step up and present a progressive view of how to manage water in urban environments, for example.
Oh, okay. I do have a question. What is Fairfax County to do to mitigate flooding? What are our programs, our initiatives, et cetera, especially with the development of Tyson's?
So, you know, very similar to Alexandria and Montgomery County, we have a flood mitigation program, you know, tied into our capital improvement program. So we are exploring, you know, retrofitting some of the neighborhoods that are lacking stormwater management. And I think we continue to do maintenance on our systems. We participate in the community rating system, which provides a discount for flood insurance to our anybody participating in the National Flood Insurance Program. And our big effort right now is to come up with a comprehensive flood risk reduction plan for the county. We have a lot of ongoing efforts, but to really bring them together and holistically look at what we can do now in our current conditions, but also looking towards the future with climate change and incorporating resiliency in that. So the effort just started, but we are, you know, it'll continue to move through this year and bring it to our leaders. And additionally, we have, separate from me, there's a Resilient Fairfax effort that's also has the Climate Adaptation Resiliency Plan that's moving forward and coming to the final stages this summer. That'll highlight some additional efforts that the county has done, is doing now, and then additional things that we can do, and we're aligning those two efforts. But to Tyson's in particular, Tyson's, when it came about over 10 years ago, aimed to set a high standard for stormwater management. We actually looked to our neighbors in DC who have a standard for retaining a certain amount of water on the property. And we mirrored that in Tyson's with a 1-inch retention requirement, really promoting the use of, as that area, which is very urban, highly impervious, as that area redevelops, incorporating green roofs, you know, urban bioretention planters and other stormwater, green stormwater infrastructure, as well as additional underground detention facilities and things that go into these urban environments to help basically retrofit a community that had lacked stormwater management in the future. So it's 10 years later, and I can share some sites as well that tracks Tyson's progress. There's been some really, it's amazing to see the area kind of start greening up.
It seems one of the problems is the lack of lot-to-lot drainage regulations. so that no one is held accountable for the runoff from their own property. And developers seem to be able to get regulations about this. Is there any way to address this? Is it really a problem?
Yes, so that ties into that residential infill, right? A lot of our regulations are focused on new subdivisions, right? These big neighborhoods coming in. And so now we're seeing, instead of a lot of those being built, we're seeing a lot of things, houses are redeveloping lot by lot. And this has been recognized as a challenge for a while. The county has implemented or is moving forward with implementing some plans where you have to do on-site stormwater management to detain any additional water that comes off of your site. So if you're adding impervious, you have to mitigate for that. And so that's a policy that's it's being applied now, but it's being formalized and should move as more formal policy in the coming months. And then we're additionally recognizing that we kind of need a more holistic approach. That's part of the planning process here. Is I think we've really realized by kind of figuring out where those causes of flooding are, a lot of it is in these older communities that are seeing a lot of redevelopment occur. Focusing our efforts on that and looking at additional ways.
Frank, do you see that as well?
Yes, so a couple things on that. Lot-to-lot drainage is definitely a problem. A lot of times it's pre-existing to some of these redevelopment efforts, and it just gets worse. And most of the remedies have been left to civil lawsuits. So we just changed one of our requirements for these redevelopment infill projects, that the project engineer has to sign a form that says the work they're doing will not increase the lot-to-lot drainage. We are also interested on Katie's comment about requiring stormwater management for all this. We do that in Montgomery County. However, there is an opportunity for developers to ask for waivers, and we're in the process of reevaluating the use of those waivers and the fees that get charged to developers if they can't do the on-site stormwater management. So it's challenging, and right now we don't really have a program to address some of these neighborhood-wide lot-to-lot drainage problems, and we're looking into developing that.
Great. I'm going to read something that Byrne, is that how you say it? Byrne, is that right?
Correct.
Good. He has, there are tough questions to carve out an opinion about. I believe they require additional in-depth scientific research. We need playing fields, and we need clean water and the management of careful water use equities. I think that really sums up a lot of what we've heard today. Diane, I'm going to put you, Habino, can I put you on the spot for a minute, please? I'm sure you've been reading the chats about the league's position. Have you been reading the chats at all?
I've heard Dr. Medina's response.
Yeah, and there's been some other comments about other people about that the National League's position is vague. And I think the National's position is vague so that each individual league can carve out a more specific position dependent on their needs. Am I correct?
Yes, the league at the national, state, and even local levels purposefully state their positions in a general manner. If the positions are stated too specifically, then leagues are limited in what they can advocate for. Therefore, the general positions, even at the national level, are used and can be used by local and state leagues to advocate for issues that they find in their local jurisdictions. So the general tenor of the national position says we want to maintain water quality and for all these purposes. But, and that's what you can use in, whether it's in Virginia, the district, or in Maryland, for advocating for specific issues. I know we had a question in the 10 Mile Creek area, and that's what we used to advocate for protection of that creek.
Right, and you certainly could tell your individual leagues that belong to the national capital area that this is something you want the national capital area to focus on, because we are an overarching organization representing 8 or 10 different leagues, and this is something that you want us to work on. But your individual leagues can work very hard on something that is representative of, say, Montgomery County, or Fairfax, or Falls Church, or Alexandria, whatever your individual league is, or me in Frederick County. Okay, are there any, if you want to unmute yourself, is there any final questions or final things that you would like to add to this really, really very informative session?
I would like to ask,
Yeah.
some people have Twitter handles. Some of us don't tweet. If you could put in the chat, either emails or other ways to communicate with you, that might be useful for the group. I would appreciate that. Some of us are Luddites, and I'm one of them.
Okay, well, we'll stay up until, how about if we stay up till 11:30, so all you other people who want to communicate can do that. And this really has been just wonderful. I so appreciate everybody's chat and the really, really informative questions, and to our speakers who seamlessly covered a wide range of topics that all flowed together. Thank you so much, everybody.
Pun intended, right?
What?
I said pun intended, they all flow together.
Pun intended, right? Yeah, I don't do that very well. So that was really, really great that I did that. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your weekend.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here.
Don't
Appreciate
turn off
everything.
the page. Don't turn us off.
Okay, bye-bye now. And we're gonna leave it, Joan's gonna leave it up till 11:30 so you all can communicate how you
We
need
have
to.
5 minutes. You're a
Thank
great moderator. Thank you very
thank
much.
you. Thank you.
And thank you to all the speakers.
Yeah, I enjoyed doing it. Thank you.
Vern, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
So I put a question in the